Don't, you will die slowly. I was in shock, unable to believe it of my husband, who was so perfect in my eyes. It couldn't be him. Before this story begins, please write in the comments what state you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so this channel can grow and bring you even more compelling stories. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly, as if wanting to melt the pavement of the farmer's market, which was already cracked in places. The air was thick and heavy, a mixture of the earthy scent of produce, the sweet smell of fried dough, and the exhaust fumes from the cars idling on the nearby street. Amid the bustling crowd of the traditional market, Ava moved slowly, her breath feeling a little heavy. The woman in the pastel sundress wiped away the cold sweat that had suddenly beaded on her temples. Lately, her body had been feeling strange. She tired easily, was often dizzy, and her heart would frequently pound for no clear reason. But she had forced herself to leave the house today to buy her favorite pomegranates from her regular stand. Her doctor had said she was anemic, and her husband, Mark, always suggested she eat more fruit in addition to the expensive medications he bought for her. Ava clutched her handbag tighter as she squeezed past a woman carrying a large shopping basket. Her head throbbed with pain again, a sensation that had become her constant companion upon waking each morning. She tried to ignore the pain and focused her gaze on the end of the market aisle where Mr. Henderson's fruit stand was located. Mr. Henderson was an honest and friendly vendor. Ava had been his loyal customer for 5 years, ever since she had first married Mark. Usually, Mr. Henderson would greet her with a booming voice and a hearty laugh, asking how Mark was doing or joking about the fluctuating price of berries. But today, something was different. From a distance, Ava could see Mr. Henderson arranging a pile of oranges with stiff movements. The middle-aged man seemed agitated, his eyes darting left and right as if he were watching for something or someone. There was no friendly smile that usually adorned his wrinkled face. When Ava approached and stood in front of his stall, Mr. Henderson jumped, startled. The orange in his hand nearly rolled to the ground. He looked at Ava, not with a welcoming gaze, but with a deep-seated fear in his eyes. Beads of sweat were clearly visible on the old man's forehead, even though he stood under the cool shade of the stall's canvas awning. Ava tried to smile, attempting to break the sudden tension that filled the air. She greeted Mr. Henderson in a soft tone, asking if he had the pomegranates she was looking for today. Mr. Henderson didn't answer right away. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He only nodded slowly, without a word. Then, with trembling hands, he picked out 3 large pomegranates from a crate at the back. His movements were rushed, as if he wanted Ava to leave as quickly as possible. Ava furrowed her brow, puzzled by the change in her regular vendor's demeanor. She thought perhaps he was having family problems or was in debt, so she decided not to ask too many questions to avoid offending him. Ava took her wallet out of her bag and pulled out a $20 bill. She held the money out to Mr. Henderson. His rough, wrinkled hand trembled violently as he took the money from her. It felt so cold when his fingers brushed against hers. Mr. Henderson turned around to get the change from the small cash box where he usually kept his money. His back looked tense. He had his back to Ava for a long time, as if he were doing something difficult. The atmosphere around the stall felt increasingly ominous to Ava. Even though the market was crowded, her intuition told her something was wrong, but she couldn't guess what it was. When Mr. Henderson turned back to face Ava, his face was deathly pale. He held out the change, which consisted of several worn-out dollar bills. But as Ava opened her palm to receive the money, she felt another object being slipped between the bills, a small, crudely folded piece of paper. Mr. Henderson looked deep into Ava's eyes, a gaze full of warning and pleading. The old man then squeezed Ava's hand tightly for a moment, so hard that she winced slightly, before he quickly let go and pretended to be busy wiping dust off his counter. Ava stood frozen for a moment. She clutched the change and the mysterious paper tightly. Not daring to open it in public, Ava quickly shoved her fist into the pocket of her dress. She murmured a thank you, which was met only with a stiff nod from Mr. Henderson. Ava turned and walked away from the stall quickly. Her heart was racing faster than before. The dizziness in her head intensified, mixed with a sudden surge of curiosity and fear. She felt as though 1,000 eyes were watching her in the market. She quickened her pace towards the parking lot where her car was. Once inside her car, Ava immediately locked the doors. Her breath came in ragged gasps. The car's air conditioning hadn't started to feel cool yet, but her body was shivering. With hands that still trembled slightly, she reached into her dress pocket and pulled out the balled-up money. Tucked inside was a tattered piece of a receipt, worn and dirty. Ava slowly unfolded the paper. The writing inside was done with a black marker in messy capital letters, as if written in a hurry and filled with fear. Ava's eyes widened as she read the sentences written there. The message read, "Stop taking the medicine your husband gives you. It's poison he buys every day on the black market. If you don't, you will die slowly." The world seemed to collapse on Ava's head. Her breath caught in her throat. She read the message again and again, hoping she had misread it or that it was just a cruel joke from a stranger. But the terrified look on Mr. Henderson's face had not been an act. The trembling of the old man's hand was the trembling of real fear. Ava leaned her back against the car seat, suddenly weak. Tears streamed down her face without her realizing it. Her husband, Mark, the man she had always considered her guardian angel, the man who was always gentle, attentive, and had never once raised his voice to her. It was impossible. Mark was the perfect husband. He worked hard, was polite to her parents, and always treated Ava like a queen. Ava's mind tried to deny the vile accusation on the paper, but a small part of her heart began to replay the events of the past few months. Her memory drifted to the moments when Mark would painstakingly prepare her medicine and vitamins every morning and night. Mark always made sure Ava swallowed the pills in front of him. "This is the best imported vitamin, honey. It's expensive, but it's worth it for your health," Mark would always say. Ava also remembered how her health had drastically declined since she started taking those vitamins regularly. At first, it was just minor nausea, then her hair began to fall out, her nails became brittle and bluish, and she felt an overwhelming weakness every time she woke up. The doctor she visited, a doctor recommended by Mark, just said it was a symptom of severe anemia and stress. Was that doctor also in on it? Suddenly, the ringing of her phone in her bag shattered the silence in the car, startling Ava so much that she nearly dropped it. She looked at her phone's glowing screen. The name My Loving Husband was displayed, complete with Mark's handsome, smiling profile picture. Seeing that name used to make Ava's heart flutter. Now, seeing it made her stomach churn, and an incredible fear creep up her spine. Her hand trembled violently as she went to press the green button. She took a deep breath, trying to normalize her voice so it wouldn't sound suspicious. She had to be calm. She couldn't be reckless. If this note was true, then she was dealing with a cold-blooded killer who slept next to her every night. Ava pressed the accept button and brought the phone to her ear. Mark's gentle and loving baritone voice came from the other side, the voice that had always been a source of comfort for Ava. Now, it sounded like the hiss of a venomous snake ready to strike. Mark asked sweetly if Ava had finished her shopping and reminded her not to get too tired. But the next sentence that came out of Mark's mouth sent a shiver down Ava's spine. Mark asked if Ava had taken her afternoon vitamin. The question would sound normal to anyone else, but to Ava, who had just read the warning note, it sounded like an executioner making sure his victim was ready. Ava squeezed her eyes shut, holding back the sobs that threatened to escape. She answered in a voice she tried to make sound cheerful, saying she was just about to take it when she got home. Mark sounded satisfied on the other end of the line. He reminded her again how important the vitamin was for her to get better quickly so they could plan their trip abroad soon. Those sweet words now felt like knife slashes to Ava's heart. Mark ended the call with the loving words he always said. But this time, Ava did not reply with the same feeling. She ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat with disgust. In the hot car, Ava felt cold. She looked at the crumpled paper in her hand one more time, squeezing it so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her faith in the marriage she had built was beginning to crack, leaving a gaping hole of doubt. The drive home from the market felt agonizingly long for Ava. The congested traffic seemed to mirror the turmoil in her mind. Every time the car stopped at a red light, the image of Mark's smiling face as he handed her a glass of water and a capsule haunted her. She began to question everything in her life. Was Mark's affection all a lie? Was the kindness of her mother-in-law, Eleanor, also just an act? Ava shook her head hard, trying to banish the dark thoughts, but logic and instinct kept screaming at her to be cautious. She looked at her own reflection in the rearview mirror. Her face looked gaunt, pale, and lifeless. The dark circles under her eyes were more pronounced. This was not the face of a happy woman well cared for by her husband. This was the face of someone slowly dying. Upon arriving home, Ava parked her car in the garage. The modern 2-story minimalist house was quiet. Mark wasn't home from work yet, and Eleanor, who usually visited or stayed over, wasn't there. Ava entered the house, which felt cold due to the centrally controlled air conditioning. She used to feel this house was her palace, her sanctuary from the outside world. Now it felt like a prison, or more accurately, a luxurious morgue. The silence inside gave her chills. Every corner of the house seemed to hold a dark secret she didn't know. Ava walked listlessly to the master bedroom. She placed her bag on the vanity and sat pensively on the edge of the bed. Her eyes were fixed on a small, dark glass bottle standing proudly on the nightstand. The bottle had no manufacturer's label, only a small sticker with handwritten dosage instructions, likely written by a pharmacist or perhaps by Mark himself. Inside were red and yellow capsules. Those were the vitamins. Ava reached for the bottle, holding it, feeling the cold glass in her palm. She wanted to take it to a lab right now, but she knew she couldn't be reckless. If Mark came home and saw the bottle was gone, he would surely become suspicious. Time passed slowly. Towards the evening, the sound of a car engine was heard pulling into the driveway. Ava's heart began to pound again. It had to be Mark. Ava quickly composed herself, applied a little lipstick so she wouldn't look too pale with fear, and tried to put on the happy wife mask she usually wore. She had to play a role. This was a matter of life and death. The bedroom door opened, and Mark's figure appeared in the doorway. He was still wearing his neat office suit, his tie slightly loosened. His face looked tired but immediately brightened upon seeing Ava. The scent of expensive cologne filled the room with his arrival, a scent Ava once loved but now made her nauseous. Mark walked closer, kissed Ava's forehead gently, and then sat next to her. He asked how Ava's day was with a very concerned tone. Mark's hand caressed Ava's cheek, a touch that made her skin crawl. Ava answered briefly, saying she was just a little tired after her trip to the market. Mark nodded in understanding. Then his eyes immediately fell on the medicine bottle on the nightstand. With a well-practiced motion, Mark took the bottle, took out one capsule, and grabbed the glass of water that was always there. He held the capsule out to Ava. His gaze was intense, demanding, as if he wouldn't move until Ava swallowed the object. "Take it, honey, so you won't be so weak all the time. I can't bear to see you sick," Mark said softly. Ava stared at the capsule in her husband's hand. In her heart, she was screaming in terror, but her body moved according to survival instincts. Ava opened her mouth, letting Mark place the capsule inside. She drank the water he offered, but she did not swallow it. Using a technique she had once seen in a movie, Ava hid the capsule under her tongue. She pretended to swallow with a convincing movement of her throat, then gave Mark a faint smile. Mark looked satisfied. He patted Ava's head once more before standing up to take a shower. As soon as the bathroom door closed and the sound of running water was heard, Ava leaped from the bed. She ran to the guest bathroom outside the bedroom so she wouldn't be heard. There, she spat out the capsule, which had started to taste bitter under her tongue, into the toilet and flushed it. She rinsed her mouth several times, removing any trace of the medicine's taste. Her breath was ragged. She looked at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Tears streamed down her face again. It was true. Her instincts told her that her husband was indeed trying to kill her. If not, why was Mark so obsessive about making sure she took the medicine in front of him? Why did he never let Ava take it herself? That night felt incredibly long. Ava pretended to fall asleep early, turning her back to Mark. She could feel Mark get into bed and hug her from behind, a hug that felt like the coils of a python. Ava held her breath, trying to keep her breathing regular as if she were already asleep. It took hours before a soft snore was heard from Mark's mouth. Her husband was fast asleep. Ava slowly opened her eyes. The room was dark, illuminated only by the light of a street lamp filtering through the gap in the curtains. This was her chance. She had to find proof. She had to know why Mark was doing this. Was there another woman, or was there an even crazier reason? With very slow and careful movements, Ava got out of bed. She tiptoed across the thick carpet to the sofa in the corner of the room where Mark usually left his work briefcase. Ava's hands trembled as she touched the expensive, genuine leather briefcase. She slowly unzipped it, praying the sound wouldn't wake Mark. She began to rummage through its contents. There was a laptop, a planner, and some office files. Ava turned on her phone's flashlight at its dimmest setting. She examined each paper one by one. Nothing seemed unusual at first, just ordinary project documents. But in a hidden inner pocket of the briefcase, Ava's fingers touched a thick brown envelope. She pulled it out. The envelope was not sealed. Ava took out its contents. It was an official letter with the letterhead of the company where Mark worked. Ava's eyes widened as she read the letter's title, Third Formal Warning and Notice of External Audit. Ava read the contents quickly. The letter stated there was a massive discrepancy in funds amounting to millions of dollars for which the finance department, led by Mark, was responsible. The company had given a deadline until the end of next month before an external audit would be conducted and the case reported to the authorities if the funds could not be accounted for. Ava covered her mouth with her hand to stifle a gasp. Her husband was an embezzler. Mark, who always appeared so righteous and full of integrity, was a thief. Before she could fully process the shock, Ava found another folded paper behind the warning letter. It was a receipt from a luxury boutique downtown, dated just 2 days ago. It listed the purchase of a limited edition women's handbag worth tens of thousands of dollars. Ava thought of her own bags. She had never received such an expensive handbag from Mark. The receipt was not for her. Then for whom? At the bottom of the stack of papers, Ava found a life insurance policy in her name. The payout value was astronomical, and there, listed as the sole beneficiary in the event of Ava's death, was Mark's name. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in Ava's mind. The embezzlement, the upcoming audit, another woman, the life insurance, and Ava's death, they were all connected. Mark needed a large sum of money to cover his embezzlement before the audit next month, and that money would come from Ava's life insurance payout and the sale of her inherited assets. Ava's body sank to the floor, her legs feeling like jelly. She felt sick to her stomach, realizing the truth laid bare before her. The man snoring in the bed was not her husband, but a monster ready to sacrifice her for money and freedom. Ava stared at Mark with a hollow gaze. The love that remained in her heart vanished instantly, replaced by a burning hatred and desire for revenge. She carefully returned all the documents to their original places, exactly as she had found them. She couldn't let him know she had discovered his secret. She had to play this smart. Ava wiped her tears away fiercely. Tonight, the naive and obedient Ava had died. What remained was a wife who would fight to save her own life and avenge every drop of poison that had entered her body. Ava climbed back into bed, lying next to her murderer with her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, silently plotting her counterattack. That morning, sunlight streamed through the slight opening in the bedroom curtains, falling directly on Ava's face. She had been awake since dawn. Unlike previous mornings when she always found it difficult to even open her eyes, today Ava felt a small but significant change in her body. The dizziness that usually hit her as soon as she woke up was much lighter. Her heart no longer pounded irregularly like someone who had just run a marathon, and the nausea that tormented her stomach had begun to subside. It had only been 2 days since she stopped taking the vitamins Mark gave her, but the effects of her body's recovery were so real. This fact further strengthened the bitter truth written on that crumpled paper. Her body hadn't been sick from a natural illness. It had been fighting against poison forced upon her by the person she trusted most. Ava rose from the bed and walked towards the large mirror in the corner of the room. She observed her reflection. Although her face still looked a bit gaunt and the dark circles under her eyes had not completely disappeared, a touch of color was returning to her cheeks. Her skin was no longer as pale as paper like it had been last week. Ava touched her own cheek, feeling the warmth of the blood flowing there. She was grateful. But at the same time, fear gripped her again. If she looked healthier, Mark would surely become suspicious. Her husband was not a fool. Mark was a keen observer, especially when it came to his plans. Ava realized she had to play her part even better. She took a translucent powder, a shade lighter than her skin, and applied it thickly to her face to look pale again. She also deliberately messed up her hair slightly and let her eyes look weary. The sound of footsteps approaching the room made Ava quickly put away her makeup. The door opened, and Mark entered with his signature smile, which now looked horrifying in Ava's eyes. The man was carrying a tray with a glass of warm milk and, of course, the cursed vitamin bottle. Ava controlled her breathing, trying to suppress the overwhelming disgust welling up in her chest. She sat back on the edge of the bed, hunching her body slightly to give the impression that she was still weak. Mark sat beside her, placed the tray on the nightstand, and then gently stroked Ava's back. The touch felt hot and repulsive, as if thousands of needles were pricking her skin. Mark asked in a soft, feigned voice if Ava had slept well. Ava nodded weakly, avoiding Mark's gaze. She answered in a hoarse voice that she still woke up frequently because of headaches. Mark clicked his tongue in sympathy, a perfect expression of insincerity. Deftly, Mark's hand took one capsule from the bottle and held it to Ava's mouth. This scene repeated itself. Ava opened her mouth, let the capsule in, drank the milk, and then quickly hid the capsule under her tongue. She made a convincing swallowing motion, even coughing a little for dramatic effect. Mark smiled, satisfied, then kissed Ava's forehead before leaving to get ready for work. As soon as Mark disappeared behind the bathroom door, Ava ran to the sink and spat out the capsule. She watched the red and yellow capsule swirl down the drain before disappearing with the water. Another close call with death, she thought. That afternoon, after making sure Mark had long gone to the office and there were no signs of him returning early, Ava decided to meet Mr. Henderson again. She needed stronger proof. The note was informative, but it wasn't enough to drag Mark to prison. She needed a witness. She needed something undeniable. Ava drove to the market with a sense of unease. She kept checking her rearview mirror, afraid that Mark's car might suddenly appear behind her. Upon arriving at the market, the atmosphere was as bustling as the day before. But this time, Ava's steps were more determined. She was no longer walking as an unknowing victim, but as a woman seeking justice. Mr. Henderson's fruit stand seemed busy serving several customers. When Henderson saw Ava arrive, his face tensed up again, but there was a hint of relief in his eyes when he saw Ava still standing tall. Mr. Henderson gave her a look, signaling her to wait until the customers had left. Ava pretended to choose apples while keeping an eye on her surroundings. Once the coast was clear, Mr. Henderson invited Ava into the cramped back part of his stall, where he usually stacked fruit crates. In that small space, smelling of cardboard and ripe fruit, Henderson looked at Ava with teary eyes. The old man seemed very guilty and frightened. Mr. Henderson finally spoke, his voice trembling. He explained that he didn't want to meddle in other people's domestic affairs, especially wealthy people like Mark, but his conscience couldn't stay silent. Mr. Henderson told her about his daughter who had died 3 years ago. Her symptoms were exactly like Ava's: weakness, hair loss, blue nails, and eventually organ failure. At the time, the local clinic doctor misdiagnosed her, but later, Mr. Henderson learned that his daughter had died of pesticide poisoning due to their ignorance in storing agricultural chemicals. Seeing Ava's face looking more and more like his daughter's in her final days haunted him. He felt God was telling him to save Ava's life so he wouldn't live with guilt for the rest of his. Then, Mr. Henderson told her what he had seen. Every Tuesday and Friday at dawn, when the market was still dark and vendors were just starting to set up, he saw Mark's luxury car parked in the quiet and dirty back alley of the market. That alley was known as a place for illegal transactions, from prescription drugs without a prescription to high-dose pest poisons that were banned. Mr. Henderson saw Mark meet with a tattooed man known as a supplier of rat and wild boar poison. Mark would always receive a small black package and give the man a thick envelope. Mr. Henderson was sure the contents of the package were not vitamins or legal medicine. No sane person would buy health supplements in a dark alley of a farmer's market from a thug. Ava listened to the testimony, with silent tears streaming down her face. Her husband had planned this meticulously and filthily. Mark, the man who always appeared well-groomed and impeccable, was willing to enter a muddy market alley to buy a murder weapon for his wife. Ava held Mr. Henderson's hand, thanking him sincerely, but a verbal testimony was not enough. In court, an expensive lawyer hired by Mark could easily twist the facts and accuse Mr. Henderson of lying or slander. Ava needed physical proof. With an urgent tone, Ava begged for Mr. Henderson's help one more time. She asked him to take a photo of the transaction if Mark came again. Mr. Henderson seemed hesitant and scared. He was just a small fruit vendor. Dealing with rich people could be dangerous for him. But seeing Ava's hopeful and desperate gaze, Mr. Henderson's courage returned. He nodded in agreement. He promised to hide his phone behind a stack of empty crates in the alley and try to take a photo or video when Mark came in 2 days, which happened to be a Friday. Ava gave Mr. Henderson some money for phone credit or other needs, but he gently refused. He said he was doing this not for money, but to atone for his guilt over his late daughter. Ava finally insisted he accept it as a gift, then left with renewed hope. In the afternoon, Ava was home before Mark returned. She deliberately did not apply the thick powder again, letting the natural color of her face show slightly. She wanted to test Mark's reaction. Sure enough, when Mark walked into the house and saw Ava sitting in the living room reading a magazine, he stopped for a moment. Mark's eagle eyes narrowed, scanning Ava's face from her forehead to her chin. There was a clear flash of disappointment and suspicion, though it lasted only for a split second before being covered by his sweet smile. He approached, but instead of kissing her forehead as usual, he held Ava's chin and turned her face left and right, as if inspecting merchandise. In a cold and sharp tone, Mark asked why Ava's face looked different today. He commented that she looked fresher than usual. The sentence should have been a compliment, but from Mark's mouth, it sounded like an accusation. Ava held her breath, her heart pounding. She answered calmly that perhaps the expensive vitamins were starting to work, or maybe because she had taken a long nap. Mark was silent for a moment, his eyes staring intently into Ava's, searching for a lie. The atmosphere in the living room felt frozen. The cold air conditioning was no match for the coldness of Mark's gaze. Then Mark released Ava's chin rather roughly. He said in a low, intimidating tone, reminding Ava to never forget to take her medicine, because if she forgot just once, the treatment would be useless, and her illness would get worse. The veiled threat sent shivers down Ava's spine. Mark then walked to his room with a sour face, leaving Ava frozen on the sofa. Ava realized that playtime was over. Mark was getting suspicious because his poison wasn't working. He might increase the dose or find another, faster way. Ava had to act faster before Mark lost his patience. 2 days passed with mounting tension inside the luxurious house. Ava lived like a spy in her own home. She carefully inspected every food and drink served to her. She only ate food she cooked herself or pre-packaged food that was still sealed. She carried her water bottle everywhere, even to the bathroom, because she no longer trusted the water from the dispenser. Mark's behavior grew stranger. He became more withdrawn and often stared at Ava with a vacant yet piercing gaze during their dinners together. The dosage of the vitamins he gave her increased. Mark reasoned that the doctor recommended a higher dose for a faster recovery. Of course, those extra capsules ended up in the drain whenever she had the chance. The long-awaited Friday morning finally arrived. From the moment she woke up, Ava couldn't put her phone down. She waited for news from Mr. Henderson with an anxious heart. Every notification sound made her jump. Did Mr. Henderson succeed, or was he caught and now in danger? Dark thoughts plagued her mind. Around 9 a.m., a message came through a messaging app. The sender's name was Mr. Henderson. Ava's hands trembled violently as she opened the message. It contained a photo and a short 10-second video. Ava downloaded the photo first. Although the image quality was a bit blurry and shaky from being taken from a distance in low light, the subjects in the photo were clear enough for Ava. There, in a dirty and gloomy market alley, stood the figure of Mark, with his work shirt sleeves rolled up. He was receiving a black plastic package from a skinny man covered in arm tattoos. Mark's face looked serious and impatient. But what made Ava's breath catch was not just that. In the background of the photo, Mark's black SUV was visible, with the front passenger door half open. Inside the car sat a woman whose face was captured quite clearly by the streetlight reflecting off the car window. That woman was Eleanor. Ava covered her mouth to stifle a scream of shock. The phone in her hand almost fell. Eleanor, Her mother-in-law, who had always been so sweet, who always brought her chicken noodle soup when she was sick, who always called her my dear daughter-in-law, the old woman who always appeared in modest dresses with prayer beads in her hand, was at the scene of an illegal poison transaction at 5 a.m. Ava's world spun. Mark's betrayal was painful enough, but knowing that Eleanor was also involved made the wound deeper and more septic. It turned out Eleanor's kindness was just a mask to hide her evil intentions. The two of them, mother and son, were conspiring to kill her. Ava then played the short video Mr. Henderson had sent. The video had no clear sound due to the distance, only the faint hustle and bustle of the market in the background. However, the visuals spoke volumes. Mark was seen getting back into the car after the transaction was complete. Eleanor was seen patting Mark's arm with a wide smile, as if congratulating her son on his success. They both seemed to be laughing lightly before the car drove off, leaving the alley behind. Laughter over a murder plan. Ava felt sick imagining that laughter. How cruel human hearts could be when blinded by greed. This photo and video evidence was enough to convince Ava of who her real enemies were. But to bring this case to court and ensure they couldn't escape, Ava needed proof of a strong motive. She had to know what they were talking about. She had to hear the evil plan come out of their own mouths. Coincidentally, today was Friday, and Eleanor would usually visit for lunch after Friday prayers. This was a golden opportunity that could not be missed. Ava quickly got ready. She went out for a short while, under the pretext of buying baking ingredients at the supermarket. Her real destination was an electronics store downtown. There, she bought a mini voice recorder shaped like a flash drive and a small surveillance camera that looked like a keychain. The technology she had only seen in detective movies was now her primary weapon for survival. Upon returning from the electronics store, Ava rushed to install the devices. She stuck the voice recorder under the living room coffee table using black tape where Mark and Eleanor usually sat and talked. She placed the small camera among a stack of books on a shelf, pointing directly at the main sofa. Her heart pounded as she did all this, afraid that Mark might suddenly come home. In the afternoon, Eleanor's car arrived as expected. The middle-aged woman got out of the car with a beaming smile, carrying a container of food. "I brought your favorite chicken curry, dear Ava," she called out in a tone so sweet it made Ava want to vomit. Ava forced her best smile, took Eleanor's hand, and kissed the back of it, a gesture of respect that now felt like kissing the hand of the devil. Not long after, Mark also came home for his lunch break. The three of them ate together at the dining table. Ava barely touched her food, reasoning that she still felt nauseous. Eleanor kept urging Ava to eat a lot, so she would get better quickly. "Eat up, dear, I made this especially for you. So you can get your strength back," Eleanor said, though Ava suspected the curry might have been laced with something as well. After the meal, Ava launched her plan. She feigned a severe headache and asked for permission to rest in the upstairs bedroom. She left Mark and Eleanor alone in the living room downstairs. "You two just chat for a while. I'm going to take a nap. My head is killing me," Ava excused herself with a pitiful look. Eleanor nodded with concern, telling Ava to rest. Once in the room, Ava locked the door. But she didn't sleep. She opened her laptop, put on her headset, and activated the application connected to the listening device in the living room. A crackling sound was heard for a moment. Then the clear voices of Mark and Eleanor came through the headset. "Well? Did she drink the new dose?" Eleanor's voice came through. Her tone had completely changed from soft to cold and urgent. There was no more gentleness, only impatience. "She did, Mom. This morning, and I just mixed it in her juice. But why is she still walking around? That guy, Tato, said this dose should be enough to paralyze someone in 3 days," Mark replied in a frustrated tone. Ava clenched the hem of her shirt. The juice. The orange juice she had a little of during lunch. Luckily, she only took one sip and spat it back into a tissue when she pretended to wipe her mouth. "You have to make sure she's dead before the end of this month, Mark." Eleanor's voice rose, filled with emotion. "Someone from corporate headquarters called me this morning, asking about the company assets you used as collateral. The audit is in 3 weeks. If your wife isn't dead by then, and we can't sell that land inheritance of hers, we're all ruined. Do you want to go to jail? Do you want me to be kicked out of my house and live on the streets? Ava held her breath. So that was the problem. Embezzlement audit, collateral assets. I know, Mom, I'm stressed out too, Mark snapped. The problem is the notary said the asset transfer document needs her signature while she's conscious. If she dies suddenly without signing, the inheritance process will be stuck in probate court for ages. That's why I'm making her sick slowly, so she feels hopeless and will sign the power of attorney for medical expenses. My plan is to bring the notary here next week. Well, speed it up then, Eleanor cut in. Make her weaker. If you have to, don't give her anything to eat except the drugged food. And remember, my country club dues are 2 months overdue because you used the money to cover your mess. I'll be so embarrassed if people find out we're broke. And that mistress of yours, Jessica, she keeps bugging me for a new apartment. It's exhausting managing your life when you're so incompetent. Yes, Mom. Don't worry about Jessica. I'll handle her. The important thing is, Ava, we need to take care of her first. Her life insurance is a decent amount too. It can pay off the rest of the debt and give us capital to live lavishly again, Mark replied. The sound of a lighter flicking was heard. Perhaps Mark was smoking to relieve his stress. Ava's tears flowed freely, soaking her cheeks. But this time, they were not tears of sadness, but tears of mounting rage. This recording was a time bomb, ready to destroy Mark and Eleanor's lives. They talked about her death as if they were discussing a failed chicken farm. Her life had no value in their eyes compared to social status, country club memberships, and an apartment for a mistress. Ava yanked off her headset. She saved the recording file in 3 different places, on her laptop's hard drive, in cloud storage, and she emailed it to a private account Mark didn't know about. This evidence was more than enough. The motives of greed, embezzlement, and infidelity were clearly stated. Now Ava knew she didn't have much time. They were planning her death in less than 3 weeks. The notary would come next week. That meant Ava had to play her final role perfectly. She would give them that signature, but it wouldn't be a signature of victory for them. It would be the signature that marked the beginning of their downfall. Ava looked in the mirror, wiped her tears, and smirked coldly. All right, Eleanor, Mark, you want a show? I'll give you the best performance you've ever seen, so good you'll forget that I'm the one setting the stage on fire. The morning sun that filtered through the blinds no longer warmed Ava's heart, which had turned to ice. Since discovering the vile plan of her husband and mother-in-law through the voice recording, Ava had metamorphosed. The once gentle and hesitant woman was now dead, replaced by a masterful actress ready to play the greatest role of her life. Ava knew that to win this war, she couldn't appear strong. On the contrary, she had to look as broken as possible. She had to give Mark and Eleanor exactly what they wanted, the sight of a wife slowly stumbling towards her grave. That morning, Ava began her performance with meticulous preparation. In front of the locked bathroom mirror, she powdered her face with a pale shade mixed with a little purple eyeshadow under her eyes to create a dramatic dark circle effect. She also let her lips become dry and chapped. Her body, which was actually starting to feel stronger from not ingesting poison, she forced to stoop and move slowly. When Mark entered the room to bring her a special breakfast, which Ava was certain was laced with a high dose of poison, she was curled up on the bed under a thick blanket, shivering as if with a high fever. Mark placed the tray on the table, his face trying to look concerned, but his eyes betrayed a glint of satisfaction. He sat on the edge of the bed, touching Ava's cold forehead. He asked, with a feigned, worried tone, if her illness was getting worse. Ava answered in a weak, hoarse voice that her whole body ached as if it had been beaten and her stomach was in knots. She even added a touch of drama by coughing dryly until her face turned red. Mark seemed pleased to hear her complaints. He immediately offered her a glass of orange juice that looked slightly darker than usual. Mark urged Ava to drink it to regain her strength. With a hand deliberately made to tremble, Ava accepted the glass. She brought it to her lips, took a small sip, then pretended to choke, spitting most of the liquid back into a small towel she was holding. "I'm sorry, Mark. I'm so nauseous. It's hard to keep anything down," Ava moaned. Mark looked slightly annoyed that his poison had been wasted, but he quickly masked his frustration with a patient smile. He told Ava to just rest and promised to bring her other medicine later that night. As soon as Mark left the room, Ava immediately poured the remaining juice into an empty water bottle she had hidden behind the dresser as additional evidence for a lab test later. 2 days later, as per the conversation Ava had bugged, Mark brought a guest to the house. The guest was a middle-aged man in a neat suit, but with a cunning smile that couldn't be hidden. He carried a heavy-looking leather briefcase. Mark introduced the man as Mr. Davis, an old acquaintance and a notary who would help with the administration for Ava's treatment abroad. The reason Mark used was very noble. He wanted to sell some of Ava's inherited land to finance a liver transplant in Singapore, which supposedly cost millions. Of course, it was all nonsense. Ava knew there was no plan to go to Singapore. The money would just go into Mark's pocket to cover his embezzlement. Ava was seated on the living room sofa, propped up with pillows to appear upright. Eleanor was also there, sitting beside Ava, massaging her daughter-in-law's shoulders with false affection. On the table, stacks of documents with official stamps were neatly arranged. Mr. Davis explained in convoluted legal jargon, but the gist was that the documents were a full power of attorney, giving Mark the right to sell Ava's inherited land and to cash out her life insurance policy early, supposedly for medical purposes. Ava listened with a vacant expression, as if her brain was too slow to process the information. "Sign here, Mrs. Ava. It's just a formality so Mr. Mark can act quickly to save your life, Mr. Davis said, holding out a gleaming gold pen. Mark stared at Ava intensely. Beads of sweat were visible on his temples. Ava knew this was the decisive moment for him. Without this signature, Mark would be finished when the company audit happened. Ava looked at the document, then at Mark's face, and finally at Eleanor's. Both antagonists were holding their breath, waiting for her to sign. Inside, Ava laughed cynically. "You think you've won?" she thought. With a hand that trembled violently this time not from acting, but from suppressed rage, Ava took the pen. She brought the tip to the official stamp. However, Ava made a clever maneuver she had practiced all night. She did not use her real signature, the one on her ID or bank documents. Instead, she made a slight modification to the final stroke and the curve of the initial letter. The difference was minuscule, hard for the naked eye of a layman or a rushed notary to detect, but it would be very clear to a forensic graphologist in court later. This forged signature would render the document legally flawed and void. After signing the last page, Ava dropped the pen as if she had run out of energy. "It's done, Mark. I want to rest," she whispered. Mark quickly snatched the documents, checking their completeness with gleaming eyes. He and Eleanor exchanged a triumphant look. They thought the foolish, dying Ava had voluntarily handed over the key to her fortune. Mark kissed Ava's cheek with the passion of a Judas, whispering thank you. They were so busy celebrating their little victory that they didn't notice the sharp, cold look in Ava's eyes as they turned their backs on her. That day, Ava let them feel on top of the world. Because the higher they flew, the more painful the crash would be when she finally brought them down. The next day, Mark went to the office in a very bright mood. The asset documents were in hand, and he was confident the company audit would go smoothly. He felt his plan was flawless. After Mark left, the house was quiet again. Ava knew she couldn't waste time. Today, she had 2 important tasks that would be the final nails in the coffin of their marriage. A lab test and uncovering the identity of the other woman. Ava waited until 10 a.m., making sure Eleanor wasn't coming to visit. Then she changed out of her sick-person house dress into casual clothes, wearing large sunglasses and a mask to cover her face. Ava left the house through a side door, ordered a rideshare, and asked to be dropped off a little far from the complex gate to avoid attracting attention from the security guard or neighbors. Her destination was a reputable private laboratory downtown, whose results would be legally admissible. In her bag, Ava carried the small bottle with a sample of the orange juice Mark had offered her, as well as a few strands of her own hair that had fallen out that morning. Her heart pounded throughout the journey. She felt like a fugitive on the run, even though she was the victim seeking justice. At the lab, Ava requested a full toxicology panel. It was expensive, but Ava didn't care. She used a backup credit card Mark knew nothing about. The lab technician looked at her strangely for requesting tests for arsenic and cyanide, which was not a common request, but Ava gave the excuse of personal research. She had to wait a few hours for the preliminary results. The waiting felt like torture. Ava sat in a corner of the cold waiting room, wringing her hands. Her mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if the results were negative? What if Mark was using a new, undetectable type of poison? 3 hours later, an analyst called her name. Ava entered the consultation room. The doctor holding the lab results looked at Ava with a serious and concerned face. "Mrs. Ava," the doctor said, showing her the analysis sheet. "We found a significant level of arsenic in the juice sample you brought, and the hair sample shows an accumulation of the same poison over the last 3 months. This is not ordinary food poisoning, ma'am. This is systematic and periodic poisoning. You must report this to the police immediately and have your internal organs checked at a hospital. This is an attempted murder." Ava accepted the results sheet with a trembling hand. Even though she had suspected it, hearing medical confirmation from an expert still made her knees weak. Arsenic. Her husband was giving her arsenic, a substance that was tasteless, odorless, but slowly lethal. This proof was absolute. There was no denying it. Ava said thank you, carefully placing the lab document in her bag as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Leaving the lab, Ava did not go straight home. She still had one more mission. She remembered the conversation from the recording about Jessica and a new apartment. Ava knew Mark often came home late with the excuse of working overtime. Today, she would prove where that overtime was actually happening. Ava contacted Mr. Henderson, asking to borrow his son's old scooter. Her car was too conspicuous, and Mark would recognize the license plate. Mr. Henderson, now fully on Ava's side, immediately brought the scooter to an agreed meeting point. In the late afternoon, Ava was on standby near Mark's office with the borrowed scooter and a full-face helmet that covered her entire face. Around 5 p.m., Mark's black car emerged from the office building. Ava started the engine, following the car from a safe distance. Mark's car didn't head towards their home but drove towards an elite apartment complex in the southern part of the city. Ava kept tailing him, skillfully weaving through traffic, something she had never done before. Adrenaline burned away her fear. Mark's car turned into the lobby of a luxury apartment building called the Royal Residence. Ava parked her scooter across the street, then ran, slipping into the lobby pretending to be a food delivery person. She saw Mark standing in front of the elevator, fixing his hair in a wall mirror. Shortly after, the elevator doors opened. A beautiful young woman with fair skin and a tight dress came out to greet Mark. The woman's belly was noticeably pregnant, about 5 or 6 months along. This woman, Ava was sure, was Jessica. She immediately hugged Mark flirtatiously and kissed his cheek in public. Mark laughed freely, a laugh that had long been absent from their home. He lovingly stroked the woman's pregnant belly, then handed her a small paper bag, likely containing jewelry or another expensive gift. The two of them then entered the elevator together, holding hands intimately, looking like the happiest couple in the world. Ava stood frozen behind a large pillar in the lobby, her heart shattered into a million pieces at the sight. But strangely, no tears came. Her tears had run dry. The heartache had crystallized into a cold, sharp resolve. Ava took out her phone, took pictures of their interaction from afar, though obstructed by the lobby glass, and noted the name of the apartment and the time. It turned out the money that should have been for her future, the money from her parents' hard work, and her very life were being gambled away just to finance the parasitic life of that woman and the illegitimate child she carried. Mark wanted to build a new family on Ava's grave. "All right, Mark," Ava whispered behind her helmet, her voice sounding chilling even to her own ears. "You want a new family? You want a lavish life? I will make sure you get a new home that's very secure, with iron bars on every window. And your woman, she will feel what it's like to fall from heaven to the depths of hell." Ava turned and left the apartment lobby with a firm stride. She no longer felt dizzy or weak. Vengeance had become the new fuel pumping through her blood, stronger than any vitamin. She returned home, snuck back in before Mark got back, and put on her dying wife mask again. But under the blanket, Ava's mind was racing, designing the final act of this drama. The upcoming wedding anniversary party, or rather the fake celebration she was planning, would become the execution stage for Mark and Eleanor. Ava smiled in the dark, a smile that promised total destruction for those who had betrayed her. Ava sat at the dining room table with a stack of invitations before her. She wrote each guest's name one by one in beautiful handwriting, but every stroke of her pen carried a cold intent. After yesterday's incident at the apartment lobby, where she saw with her own eyes how Mark spoiled his mistress with the proceeds of his crimes, there was no longer a shred of doubt in Ava's heart. She had resolved to end this charade with a massive explosion. She didn't want to just quietly report them to the police. She wanted total annihilation. She wanted to humiliate Mark and Eleanor in front of the people they most respected and feared. Ava wiped away any remaining tears from the corners of her eyes, then put on a brave face as she heard Mark's footsteps descending the stairs. Mark had just woken up, still in his expensive silk pajamas. He saw Ava busy with the invitations and furrowed his brow. Ava immediately sensed her husband's presence. Before Mark could ask with suspicion, Ava spoke first, her voice made as soft and weak as possible. She said that before they left for Singapore for her liver transplant next week, she wanted to host a simple farewell dinner at home. Ava reasoned that she felt her life might not be long. The surgery was high risk, and she wanted to see the faces of her extended family and Mark's work colleagues one last time. Ava said this with tears in her eyes, an award-worthy performance. Mark was silent for a moment, his mind quickly weighing the pros and cons. At first, he seemed reluctant, afraid Ava might leak something or act strangely, but Ava cleverly added that she wanted to invite Mr. Thompson, the CEO of Mark's company. Ava reasoned that she wanted to thank him personally because the company had granted Mark a long leave of absence to care for her. Hearing Mr. Thompson's name, Mark's eyes lit up. He saw this as a golden opportunity. If Mr. Thompson came and saw Ava's dying condition, it would strengthen his alibi. Mr. Thompson would be a key witness that Mark was a devoted husband caring for his terminally ill wife. Furthermore, Ava's death during or shortly after a family gathering would seem very natural and tragic, far from any suspicion of murder. Mark finally agreed to the plan enthusiastically. He even offered to help distribute the invitations to his colleagues at the office. In Mark's mind, this was the perfect stage to portray himself as husband of the year before he became a wealthy widower. Ava smiled faintly at her husband's foolishness. Mark was so obsessed with his image that he forgot that forced perfection often has fatal flaws. That same day, preparations for the party began. Ava ordered catering from a family-favorite vendor and arranged for decorations of white lilies, often associated with mourning, to add a dramatic touch to this farewell. Meanwhile, Eleanor, informed of the plan, also welcomed it with joy. She called Mark and sounded excited about what dress she should wear to look elegant yet convey the sorrow of a mother-in-law. Ava, who overheard their conversation, could only shake her head. The mother and son were truly a pair of narcissistic criminals. They cared more about their appearance in front of guests than the life of someone they were trying to kill. Ava let them get busy with their fantasies of victory. She herself was busy preparing the main gift for the event. She contacted a hired audio-visual technician, asking them to install a large projector screen in the living room under the pretext of showing a video of Ava and Mark's love story. The night before the event, the tension in the house reached its peak. Mark seemed restless, but tried to hide it. He went back and forth to the kitchen several times, checking the supply of medicines and drinks. Ava peeked from the slightly ajar door of her room. She saw Mark standing at the kitchen counter, holding a small bottle of clear liquid that Ava knew was not just water. Mark mixed the liquid into a special bottle of orange syrup he had marked. Mark's hands seemed to tremble, not from fear, but from overflowing excitement. "This is the last one, honey. Tomorrow night, you will sleep peacefully forever," Mark muttered softly, his words faintly caught by Ava's ears. Ava slowly backed away to her bed. Her heart pounded, not from fear of death, but from the adrenaline of battle. She knew that tomorrow night Mark would give her the lethal dose in the middle of the party. Her husband's plan was so cliché: make Ava collapse in front of everyone from a heart attack or organ failure due to her illness. That way, no one would request an autopsy because everyone had seen how sick Ava had been. But Mark forgot one thing. The Ava of today was not the Ava of yesterday. Ava had prepared a counter-strategy. She had bought a high-dose liquid laxative that was the same color as the orange syrup, as well as some red food coloring for dramatic effect. On the morning of the big day, the house was a hive of activity. Catering staff began setting up the buffet tables. White lilies decorated every corner, giving off a fragrant yet piercing scent, much like a funeral home. Ava spent hours at her vanity. This time, she didn't make her face look as pale as usual. She wanted to look beautiful, yet fragile. She wore an elegant sea blue silk gown, Mark's favorite color when they first met. Looking at her reflection in the mirror, she whispered to herself, "Tonight is your last night as a victim, Ava. Tomorrow, you will be reborn as a winner." As evening approached, guests began to arrive. Luxury cars lined the front yard. Eleanor arrived in a black lace dress, her face heavily made up to hide the evil wrinkles. She immediately approached Ava, hugging her tightly in front of the arriving guests. "Be strong, dear. I am always praying for your recovery," Eleanor said loudly, her voice trembling for effect, making sure everyone heard. Ava returned the hug stiffly, feeling the falseness of the old woman's heartbeat. Mark stood beside them, greeting each guest with a polite, concerned smile, playing his role as the steadfast husband. The peak of tension occurred when a luxurious black sedan entered the driveway. It was Mr. Thompson, the CEO. Mark rushed to welcome his boss. He guided Mr. Thompson into the living room, introducing him to Ava, who sat weakly on the sofa. Mr. Thompson, an imposing older man, looked at Ava with pity. "I'm very sorry to hear about your condition. Mark often tells me at the office how worried he is about your health." "I hope the treatment in Singapore goes well, Mr. Thompson said, sincerely. Ava smiled faintly, looking deep into Mr. Thompson's eyes. "Thank you, sir. I believe tonight will be a very decisive night for all of us. You will surely see a side of my husband that you have never known." Mark laughed awkwardly, thinking Ava was praising him, when it was actually a warning. Mark then excused himself to the kitchen for a moment. Ava knew the time had come. Mark was going to get the special drink. Ava gave a subtle signal to Mr. Henderson, who was disguised as one of the catering staff that night, thanks to Ava's help. Mr. Henderson nodded slowly from the corner of the room, his hand ready on the light switch and the projector remote. The stage was set. The actors were in position. The curtain on the final act was about to rise, and Ava was ready to give a performance that would make Mark and Eleanor regret they were ever born. The living room of the luxurious house was now filled with about 50 guests. The clinking of silverware against porcelain plates mingled with the low murmur of conversations as guests discussed Ava's sad fate. The crystal chandelier cast a warm, golden light, but to Ava, the atmosphere felt as cold as ice. She sat in the main chair, facing the large projector screen, which was currently displaying a slideshow of their romantic wedding photos. The photos were taken 5 years ago when their smiles were still genuine, before the poison of greed corrupted everything. Each time a photo changed, Ava's heart ached, but the pain was quickly covered by a thick layer of anger. Mark emerged from the kitchen carrying a silver tray. On it were 2 crystal glasses filled with bright yellow orange juice. He walked through the crowd with confident strides. All eyes were on him. He looked so handsome and devoted, bringing a drink for his sick wife. As Mark approached, Ava could see beads of sweat on his forehead. There was a hidden tension behind that wide smile. Mark placed the tray on the small table in front of Ava. "Honey, here's your favorite fresh orange juice. I made it special with extra vitamins to give you strength to greet Mr. Thompson and the other guests," Mark said, his voice loud enough for Mr. Thompson, sitting nearby, to hear. Ava looked at the 2 glasses. At a glance, they looked identical. But Ava saw a tiny scratch she had made earlier on the coaster under the glass on the right. Mark, too nervous, didn't notice. The right glass was safe. The left glass was death. Mark, with a faintly trembling hand, picked up the left glass and offered it to Ava. "Drink up, dear," he urged. Ava took the glass, her heart pounding. She knew one sip from this glass could send her to the hospital, or even to her grave, if the dose was as high as the recording suggested. But Ava was ready. As Mark turned to get his own glass to propose a toast, Ava, with lightning speed, took advantage of the moment. Mr. Henderson, the caterer, loudly dropped an empty tray in the corner of the room. She swapped the glass in her hand with the one on the table, Mark's glass. The sound of the dropped tray made everyone, including Mark, turn in surprise. In that split second, the switch was made. When Mark turned back to Ava, she was holding the safe glass. The poisoned glass, which Ava had actually filled with a super-strength laxative and food coloring when she had snuck into the kitchen earlier, was now in front of Mark. "Come on, Mark, let's toast to the future," Ava said with a sweet, mysterious smile. Mark, unaware of the swap, picked up the remaining glass. He raised it high. "To the recovery of my beloved wife Ava, and to the success of us all," he declared. Eleanor, in the corner, clapped the loudest, her eyes gleaming as she watched Ava drink. Ava drank her juice to the last drop. Mark also downed his in one gulp to show solidarity. The cold liquid flowed down their throats. Ava tasted the freshness of real orange. Mark tasted something slightly different, perhaps a bit bitter, but he ignored it, thinking it was just the rind. "Now, ladies and gentlemen," Ava's voice suddenly rang out, loud and firm, a stark contrast to her weak tone moments ago. She stood up straight, casting off the blanket covering her legs. All the guests fell silent, shocked by the drastic change. "Before we enjoy dessert, I'd like to present a special video. It's not a video of past memories, but a video of the truth that has been hidden in this house." Mark frowned. "Ava, what are you doing? What video is this?" he asked frantically. Ava didn't answer. She pressed the play button on the remote she had hidden behind a sofa cushion. The projector screen flickered. Their wedding photos disappeared. The room went silent. Suddenly, a blurry but clear video appeared. It was Mark in the dark market alley, receiving a package of poison from a tattooed thug. A murmur went through the guests. "That's Mr. Mark. What is he doing in a place like that?" someone whispered. The video changed. Now, it was not an image but the visual representation of an audio recording. The voices of Mark and Eleanor boomed through the expensive sound system. "You have to make sure she's dead before the end of this month, Mark. The audit is in 3 weeks. If your wife isn't dead and her inheritance isn't released, you'll go to jail for embezzlement." Eleanor's voice was clear and cruel. The face of Mr. Thompson, the CEO, turned crimson with rage. He recognized the voices and the context. "Embezzlement," he muttered the word, shocked. Then his eyes shot daggers at Mark. Mark was frozen. The blood seemed to stop flowing in his veins. His face was paler than a corpse. He tried to shout, "Turn it off! That's a lie! It's edited!" But his voice was choked. Suddenly, his stomach felt as if it were being squeezed by a giant hand. The effect of the double-dose laxative, exacerbated by extreme psychological panic, was kicking in with lightning speed. Cold sweat poured down his forehead. The video continued. "And that mistress of yours, Jessica, she keeps bugging me for a new apartment." This time, it was Ava's extended family who was shocked. Her aunts and uncles covered their mouths in disbelief. Eleanor, standing in the corner, looked as if she had been struck by lightning. She tried to approach the projector to unplug it, but her path was blocked by Mr. Henderson and 2 security guards whom Ava had coordinated with. In the midst of the chaos, Mark collapsed to the floor. He clutched his stomach, groaning in agony. It wasn't just a stomachache, it felt like his intestines were being twisted. He began to feel dizzy, and his vision blurred, a psychosomatic effect from thinking he had just drunk the poison he had prepared for Ava. "Pain, help, poison," he moaned, rolling on the expensive carpet. A thin foam began to emerge from his mouth, an effect of the food coloring reacting with his saliva, a trick Ava learned online. Ava walked slowly towards her pathetic, writhing husband. She stood over him, looking down with a cold, merciless gaze. The guests backed away, frightened by the scene. Mr. Thompson stood up, demanding an explanation. "Relax, Mr. Thompson, and everyone," Ava said, her calm voice commanding the room. "My husband has not been fatally poisoned. He just drank the juice he mixed himself for me. I swapped them. But don't worry, I'm not as cruel as he is. I replaced the arsenic with a laxative, so what he's feeling now is just a stomachache from his own sins." Ava then turned to Mr. Thompson. "Mr. CEO, that recording was real. My husband embezzled company funds to finance his mother's lifestyle and his mistress. All the proof of transfers, fake audits, and the life insurance policy he wanted to cash in on my death have been sent to your email and to the police 5 minutes ago." The wail of police sirens grew louder, approaching the house, providing the perfect soundtrack for the downfall of Mark and Eleanor. Mark looked up at Ava from the floor with wide eyes, a mixture of unbearable physical pain and soul-crushing shame. He had fallen into the pit he had dug himself, and Ava was the one holding the shovel to bury him. The chaos in the lavish living room spiraled out of control. Mark, who had moments before been the dashing host, now writhed on the carpet like a worm on a hook. His handsome face was a twisted mask of agony. The pain in his stomach was excruciating, but it was nothing compared to the humiliation that was utterly destroying his pride in front of his family, his colleagues, and most importantly, his boss. He let out a long, pathetic groan, begging for help that never came. Ava stood tall near her helpless husband, her expression a mixture of relief, disgust, and a faint sadness for the man she had once loved. There was no sadistic pleasure on her face, only the calm of a judge who had delivered a just verdict. She saw Mark reach for the hem of her gown, as if seeking forgiveness, but Ava stepped back. She would not let those filthy hands touch her again. "Ava, how could you?" Mark rasped, a reddish foam appearing at the corner of his lips from the food coloring. "I'm your husband. How could I?" Ava repeated, her low, sharp voice cutting through the noise. "You talk about cruelty, Mark? Do you remember mixing arsenic into my vitamins every morning? Do you remember smiling sweetly as you fed me, knowing you were slowly killing me? Who is the cruel one here? The pain you feel is temporary. The damage you planned for me was permanent. Don't you dare speak of cruelty to me." Mr. Thompson, his face still flushed with anger, stepped forward. He felt utterly betrayed by one of his most trusted employees. He looked at Mark with disgust before turning to Ava, his eyes filled with a sincere apology. "Mrs. Ava," he began, his voice trembling, I am at a loss for words. I am ashamed and sorry for not realizing I had a snake in my company. I have received the evidence you sent. Our IT and internal audit departments have already confirmed the suspicious fund transfers to personal accounts belonging to Mark and his mother. This is unforgivable. I assure you, as of this moment, Mark is fired in disgrace, and the company will sue him for every single dollar he stole until he rots in prison. The words hit Mark like a sledgehammer. Fired, sued, imprisoned. His career, his reputation, all gone in a single night, destroyed by the wife he had considered meek and foolish. Meanwhile, Eleanor, recovering from her shock, tried to sneak towards a side door. She thought she could escape, sell her jewelry, and flee. But her path was blocked by 2 security guards. "Out of my way! Do you know who I am?" she shrieked, but her pale face betrayed her terror. "Sorry, ma'am. No one leaves until the police arrive," one of the guards stated firmly. Just then, the front door burst open. A young woman with a tight dress revealing a pregnant belly stood there. It was Jessica. "Where's the money you promised?" she shrieked, marching towards Eleanor. "Mark said his sick wife would be dead this week and we'd be rich. Where is it?" A chilling silence fell over the room. Jessica's raw, brutal confession was the final, undeniable proof. Eleanor tried to silence her, but Jessica shoved her away. "Don't you know me? We went shopping every week with Mark's credit card." "This is your grandchild!" she screamed, pointing at her belly. Ava stepped forward, her voice calm but authoritative. "Jessica, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I'm not barren, and I'm not dead. The ATM you've been using has been permanently shut down." Before Jessica could process this, several uniformed police officers entered, led by a stern-faced captain. Mr. Henderson pointed at Mark and Eleanor. "Those are the ones, officer. Attempted murder and embezzlement." The police acted swiftly. They hauled a limp Mark to his feet and handcuffed him. They did the same to Eleanor, who shrieked and flailed, blaming her son for everything. Jessica, seeing Mark being arrested, backed away in terror, realizing her dream of a luxurious life was over. A policewoman stopped her. "You'll need to come to the station as well, for questioning as a key witness and a recipient of criminal funds." One by one, They were led out to the waiting patrol cars, their flashing blue lights painting the night. After the police and most of the guests had left, the house fell quiet once more. It was no longer the chilling silence of a tomb, but the peaceful quiet after a storm. Ava sat on the sofa, exhausted but feeling as light as a feather. She looked at the glass of juice on the table, the one filled with evil intent, now thwarted. She took the glass to the kitchen and poured its contents down the sink, washing away the last remnants of her toxic marriage. That night, for the first time in a long time, Ava knew she would sleep soundly, without fear of not waking up the next morning. 6 months had passed. The legal process against Mark and Eleanor was swift, thanks to the overwhelming evidence. On the day of the verdict, Ava sat in the courtroom, looking radiant and healthy. Mark and Eleanor, on the other hand, were shells of their former selves. Mark was gaunt and graying, while the once glamorous Eleanor looked old and broken. The judge's gavel fell. Mark was sentenced to 20 years in prison for embezzlement, fraud, and attempted murder. Eleanor, proven to be a key instigator, received 15 years. Jessica, having cooperated with the authorities, avoided prison but had all her assets seized. She was evicted from her luxury apartment and, last Ava heard, had returned to her hometown in shame with her newborn baby. Karma had worked its perfect, patient way. Ava left the courthouse and breathed in the fresh, free air. She was officially divorced, her inherited lands were safe, and she was financially secure. But she hadn't forgotten the man who saved her life. That afternoon, she drove to the farmer's market. The old, grimy stall was gone. In its place, in a prime location at the front of the market, stood a modern, clean, air-conditioned fruit store with a bright sign, Henderson's Fresh Harvest. A month earlier, Ava had used her savings to lease and renovate the space for Mr. Henderson. It was the least she could do. He was overjoyed to see her, his face beaming with happiness. "Mrs. Ava, you look so healthy," he exclaimed. Thank you so much. This store has been such a blessing. I've even had to hire 2 employees." "It's your blessing, Mr. Henderson. Your reward for your honesty," Ava replied warmly. "If it weren't for that crumpled note, I wouldn't be here today. This store is nothing compared to the life you saved." Later that evening, Ava sat on her back porch, overlooking her quiet garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. She ate a bowl of freshly cut pomegranate, its taste sweet and refreshing, far better than any expensive vitamin. The betrayal still stung, but the wound was healing. She was independent, she was healthy, and most importantly, she had her dignity back. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Thank you, Ava. Because of your courage, I learned the truth about Mark. He almost tricked me into a relationship too. I'm glad I got out. I hope you'll always be happy." Ava smiled. It seemed she wasn't his only victim. He deserved to be locked away forever. She put her phone down, leaned back, and closed her eyes, enjoying the evening breeze. She was finally, truly free. No more poison in her body, no more poison in her life. This house was now filled only with positive energy. She promised herself she would use this second chance at life to do good, to help others, and to be stronger than ever before. The sky grew darker, and stars began to appear. Ava opened her eyes and looked at the brightest one. She